Welcome. This is a rapid game that I played last night, and it did not go very well, but I just wanted to hit a few key points. In the opening, I played the London, which I often do as white because it's the one I'm the most familiar with. Still trying to learn it. Everything worked well until I was, in fact, making some of the computer recommended moves. Until about here, you can see the computer still making up its mind whether I should capture this bishop or just go ahead and get this one out. Normally what I do when this bishop comes to b6 is I have been pulling mine back, kind of hoping that they will capture so that I can recapture with my pawn and open the h-file for my rook. But in a lot of evaluations, including this one, it says that my best move is to just go ahead and trade these bishops. I already have pawns on dark squares here, and I will continue to build on the dark squares so I can get rid of the dark squared bishop. It's weird, when I ran the evaluation earlier, it said my best move was this, which I couldn't figure out because it's so easily blocked, and then it wanted me to bring this bishop back to d3. But anyway, now it is saying what it says it has said in many previous evaluations. I should capture this bishop. So this time I remembered that. I captured the bishop, traded it off immediately. And then I broke one of the principal rules, or the opening principles, which is to not move the same piece twice in the opening. We just completed move 5. So I should bring this bishop out so I can castle. I can also bring this knight here, or move this pawn up. The computer actually wants me to put it on c4, but I should finish my development. But I'm not sure why. I put this knight in the middle, so basically wasting an opening move, not accomplishing anything. I'm not really threatening anything here. These squares aren't doing much, so I'm at a slight disadvantage here. My opponent continues developing. They castle. I finally do get my other knight out. Now here, I've got a couple of okay choices. It says my best choice is to move the f-pawn to lock this knight into the center. The other one is to capture the knight, and we'll be close to even. I didn't do those things. I guess I was worried that their knight was going to come down here, so I played a3. And you can see the evaluation bar dropping. Did I have? Yes, I have the evaluation bar visible. Okay. And then they took my knight, which was a really good move for them because they also get this pawn. And it's not just a knight trade. Now they're up a pawn, one of my center pawns. So not great for me. That was to protect this pawn, which the queen was pointing at. But the next key point in this game, I remained slightly behind. Up until it didn't like that, but here I was thinking of a kind of a reverse fishing pole trap. A lot of times if you can get a knight in here and they'll pull the h pawn up, you go ahead and let them take it, so you take back, and then once you have your queen over here, your queen and your rook are lined up on that square. That was one of the ideas, especially after they put that knight there. I put my queen here, which again lines up this idea. So I'm going to put my knight here and line up the kind of a reverse fishing pole trap. But what happened was that my opponent kind of played into it. And here I had the chance to reverse what my opponent had done to me earlier, where they traded the knights and won a pawn. I took their knight, but I didn't take the pawn back. Now my idea of the reverse fishing pole trap is not viable anymore, but here I could have won this pawn back. I didn't. In fact, you can see that's the top recommended move, but instead I did the third best move, which was harass the queen. A lot of players at my level, if they get their queen out too early and you can put pressure on it, they waste a lot of time moving their queen to safety. So that was my idea here. They put it in a good spot. We remained about even, slightly with a black advantage until Well, it didn't like that one very much. But my opponent didn't respond well to it. The problem with this move, which gives me the advantage again, is that now I can take this pawn. But I didn't see that. I saw that this queen was threatening my unprotected pawn, and I did not see that capturing this pawn would protect that pawn. It would protect my e-pawn, and it would threaten this rook. So I moved my king up to protect the pawn. My opponent makes the best move, and now I can't capture the e-pawn anymore. So I'm trying to remember where the next big a big problem in the game came. Here you can see I'm a little far behind. Now, that was a bad move. My idea, kind of silly probably, was to go here where it would be protected by this pawn and threaten the queen. But, I mean, that's easily taken care of. They just take that pawn. And now my rook's kind of just stuck out there doing nothing, doesn't have really anywhere to go. And so I did that. Now my opponent has a large advantage, and they have a large advantage for quite some time. They can throw in this pawn capture with check first, and then when I recapture the pawn, they can do all sorts of things. The next move that they're supposed to do after that is this. They instead did that first. And I realized if I capture this pawn with my bishop, I'm just going to lose my bishop. If I don't capture it with my bishop, then I'm going to lose one of these two pieces. Which is, so I decided to take a pawn out with me, but now I'm just down a piece, and I have to move the rook. So yeah, I'm down. I think this was probably the lowest point in the game. If you can see the evaluation bar, it's at -11. At this point, I shouldn't stand a chance. I'm down a minor piece. My pawn situation is not horrible because, unlike my opponent, I actually have a passed pawn, a connected passed pawn. And at this point, I realized this is on move 26. I have 5 minutes left in a 10-minute game. At this point, I realized that might be my only advantage, and it's the only reason I didn't resign here once I realized. I didn't know I was down 11 points, but I knew I'm down a full piece. And I know my opponent's got their two rooks connected. Their king is safer than mine. They've got this wad of pawns that looks like it's, coming pretty hard for me. They moved their bishop out of danger. And here I should have just taken this pawn. I think the reason that I didn't is I saw that the queen was protecting this pawn and it would just push forward. But I did that. I threw in a check. Oh no, this is the worst point in the game according to the evaluation. Now I'm down over 12 points. But my idea was here that they probably weren't expecting this check. Wow, that's a hard to see arrow. There we go. I threw in this check with the idea that I didn't have much else to do. They did not move the king out of check. They did one of the worst things they could do, which was put their queen there. Now, in general, it's not a good idea to trade pieces when you're down a piece, because every time you do that, your opponent gets closer to being the only one that has a piece left. But here, again, I saw really no option, and it does turn out to be the best move, but I saw that if I didn't trade pieces, then I would just have to put my queen somewhere else, and I didn't have a really good place for it. Yes, I almost did this, thinking, oh, their queen is pinned. But of course, if I did that, they would just capture my queen. So I traded queens, and now I'm seeing, I have two rooks left. They have two rooks and a bishop. But again, I'm seeing these pawns. So I'm trying to think of a way. They don't have any passed pawns. I do have a passed pawn. If they do create one of their own passed pawns here, I can block this with my king. So they put their rook behind their now passed pawn, which I blocked with my king. And one of us needs to be taking control of this open file right now, but it's saying that that's what they should do, is put their rook there, but they didn't. They moved this pawn forward. So I put my rook on the open file. I just learned this in the Jeremy Silman book that I read recently, Rooks Belong in Open Files. So there we did. This rook would love to be behind this passed pawn, but it can't get there right now. So it has to be in front of it. Their idea here, I'm not sure, because this pawn can't possibly get through. The only thing it can do is remove a couple of mine. So that was not a great idea on their part. I decided to protect that one so that these 3 pawns aren't going to go anywhere. They're blocked by my 3 pawns. And they have a light squared bishop, which can protect this one, but it can't get to my king. So my king is functioning as a pawn right now, keeping that one from going anywhere. Here, it says I just should have taken it because my rook is guarding that spot. I should have taken it with the pawn. But I guess I was afraid. I wanted these 2 passed pawns to stay connected, and I thought if they take me, then I come in here. But anyway, I did not take that pawn. I threatened the bishop, which wasn't a great idea, but then they did that, which also doesn't do anything. So now I did the best move by accident because I see I can clear here. I can start clearing. They did that. I took with the wrong pawn because this rook can take this one, but still I have 2 connected passed pawns that they're going to have to do something about. Now they're aiming at this one. On their next turn, they're going to take that pawn, but they can't because I've got this tempo right here. So we have to trade rooks. Now they should take this pawn. And this was one huge mistake on their part. They didn't. They went to protect their passed pawn with the bishop. Because if they had taken the pawn that they wanted to take, I obviously was going to take that one. But they didn't, so now I can protect that pawn. They decided not to trade rooks, which is awesome because now I have 2 passed pawns and one of them starts moving. So now this is another key point in the game where the evaluation shows that we're even, and I should move this pawn up to keep these 2 connected. Once I do that, then I can move my rook. But I did that, much to my credit. That's the move that gave me the advantage. Now, when I was running the evaluation the first time, I felt bad for my opponent right here because that looks like a good move. Let's back up. This pawn's unprotected. The opponent is up 1 pawn currently. Well, actually, they're up a piece and I'm up 2 pawns. But the idea is they can start clearing off my pawns. They can take that. They can come down here and take this one. And so I felt bad when it shows, boom, they're just down now 2.5 points. But the reason that that's a bad idea is because I can throw in a check, which gets my rook out of the way of this pawn, and then I can move that pawn. But I didn't. I moved the wrong pawn, which that's okay. It says now that they should take this one, which I'm not sure because I would just take it back. And then they wouldn't be up a piece anymore. But they didn't. They did this, which was their plan all along. Remember, they came across here, took this pawn. Their plan was to come down here and take this one with check. But now I can move this pawn out of danger of the bishop and guard my other passed pawn. I didn't. I did that, which is fine. I still have a slight advantage, and I'm 1 move from queening. So now they're in desperado mode. They see that I'm a move away from getting a queen. They put me in check. I come after the bishop. They take that pawn, which gives me a bishop. Now all they can do is go guard that pawn, and I'm there too. At this point, it became clear to me that I was slightly better at these rook and pawn endgames than my opponent. I'm not very good, but I realized here that I'm in better shape than my opponent, even though the computer shows the evaluation is way down. But they did this, and I put my king in front of it. They can't move this pawn anymore. And if they move this rook anywhere to say check or to go after that pawn, I just take this one. And I still have a passed pawn, or I could be passed pawn over here if I'm careful. But my opponent has 4 minutes left. I have less than 2. So it's getting a little tense at this point. Both of us are moving very quickly. They realize they now have a passed pawn over there, and their king can guard it on the way down. But I realized I can go over here as a decoy, mess with this, and I still, I could possibly have this. So at this point, I realized if they take my pawn, I promote my b pawn with check. And that's why I made that move. I was pretty proud of myself for seeing that. This is not a tactic I picked up in a puzzle or anything. I happened to see it during the game. If they take, I promote, and it's check. They have to get out of check. Then I pick up the rook, and then I'm picking up this pawn, and I'm stopping that one too. So that was a pretty cool moment for me. Now, if they don't take, I can either take or just go past it. Now, here it says that their best move was actually to put me in check. But look at the evaluation. It's 55. Let's back up. Right here, zeros. It's zeros. They should have gotten the king off of this diagonal, but they had no idea what I was going to do next. And so they pushed this h-pawn. Now look at that, 55. If I find this. If I don't find that, if I make any other move, it's dead drawn, zeros or worse. I could probably find a worse move than zeros. But again, pretty proud of myself for spotting that tactic. And they did not make the exact best move. They should have put me in check first. But they didn't want to do that because their rook is guarding this pawn. They went back there, which is not a horrible move. But now it means I can do that. The computer is actually saying I should have checked with the rook at this point. That's okay. I checked here thinking if they capture it, then I promote with check, which was kind of the plan when the king was over here. But they didn't capture it. They got in front of it. So now I realize, now if I promote, I win this rook. Again, it's saying I should say check with my king. With my rook. Oh, wait, which is what I did. Okay, so they take that pawn. Now I promote, and I win the rook. Now, I'm not going to say I'm very good at this, but at this point, I know I'm one. But I'm down to a minute. My opponent still has nearly 4 minutes. So the plan is to first stop that passed pawn, which I did, and then clear off the other one, which my king has been holding on. Now it says I have mate in 16. I don't think I quite did it. Actually, I got mate in... Yeah, it says it took me 22 more moves. But at this point, as long as you're careful, as long as you don't hang a piece and the opponent hangs their final pawn, use your king and rook together to trap that king. Once you get in opposition, you can move the rook down. It forces the king further back. I'm going to close that square right there because it's just distracting at this point. The engine will find better moves. But the idea is once the king gets directly across from my king, all 3 of these squares are blocked off and it can't come forward. So I can go down, and then that forces their king to go backwards somewhere. So that's what we did. They went backwards. I found the opposition. Again, there were probably better moves in some of these cases. But once the kings face each other, I can move the rook down. And here, I almost fell into the trap of repeating moves once I realized they were going to repeat. If I'd done it one more time, it would have been a draw. But that was so close. I shouldn't have repeated the first time. But anyway, now there's nothing they can do. They go to opposition and it's checkmate. So again, very proud of myself and happy with this game. Thank you for watching. Let's keep our fingers crossed that I can keep this up.